Besides tracking active fund managers against their respective benchmarks, S&P Dow Jones Indices also compares how consistently recent top performers are able to keep producing winning records in subsequent years. The U.S. Persistence Scorecard, as it's called, serves as an extension of the research series that's become so widely accepted that's commonly known by its SPIVA acronym, which stands for Standard & Poor Indices versus Active. To explain the aims and methodology of the persistence scorecards, we're fortunate to have with us today Craig Lazzara, who is Managing Director at S&P Dow Jones Indices. Hi, Craig. Thanks for being with us today.
Murray, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure. These persistent reports are officially referred to as scorecards, correct? Why is that?
They're of the same family with SPIVA. In fact, they rely on the same database of mutual fund returns. And we kind of view it as an extension of the SPIVA franchise. So scorecard for one, scorecard for all.
Okay. And the persistent scorecard tracks the percentage of U.S. equity funds that remained in the top quartile, 25%, or top half, 50% of their rankings over 5 consecutive annual periods. Why is this important?
Well, it's important because even in a really tough year for active managers, I think in like 2014, for example, I think only 14 or 15% of the active managers in our SPIVA database outperformed. But even in a really tough year, some managers outperform. And the question that naturally arises is, to what degree did they outperform because they were lucky? And to what degree do they outperform because they were genuinely more skillful than the managers who underperformed? Well, one way to think about that question and draw inferences about it is to look at the persistence of the success of outperformers. And I say that because I kind of anchor it in the view that we've talked about before, that over time, skill persists, but luck dissipates. So, for example, there are a number of ways to skin the persistence cat. I mean, one way is to look at above median performers. Another is to look at top quartile performers. Another is to look, we can look at 3-year intervals or 5-year intervals or single-year intervals. Lots of ways to do it. They all lead you to the same conclusion. So here's what the logic of persistence is. Let's suppose in a given period of time, could be 1 year, could be 5 years, in a given period of time, I've identified all the managers who were above median. And that's, in a sense, Murray, as you know, that would be an easier standard. I'm not referring to whether they outperform the S&P 500 or some other benchmark or not. I'm just saying they're above median. They're the best of the bunch, the top half of the performers. And then ask the question, all those guys in the top half, did they get there by being lucky? Did they get there because they were genuinely skillful? Well, if you take as a null hypothesis, for example, take the hypothesis that they all got there simply because they were lucky, what would you expect to see in subsequent years? Well, you would expect 50% of the above median managers in period 1 also to be above average in period 2, because 50% of the total are always above median by definition. If you saw a fraction of repeat outperformance that was substantially greater than 50%, you would say, wow, maybe these guys who outperformed in the first period really are genuinely more skillful than the managers who underperform, because they consistently outperform. In fact, what you see over most measurement periods and most standards of measurement is that the outperformance rate is even less than you would expect from random selection. So, for example, one of my favorite takes in persistence, and I like to look at the longer term data, is you go back 10 years, split the 10-year period into the first 5 years and the second 5 years. Take all the managers who were above median in the first 5 years, say, how'd they do in the second 5 years? And if you do that for the most recent report we ran, for all large cap managers I want to give you the exact number of all large cap managers who were above median in the first 5 years, 37% of them, only 37%, were above median in the second 5 years. Well, that suggests very strongly that luck rather than skill is what produced the results that in the first 5 years. And so we study persistence because it lets us make inferences about the source of outperformance. And the inference that you almost always are forced to by the data is that when you see outperformance, it has much more to do with skill than with luck than with skill. Another way to say that, by the way, and this is familiar to anyone who's ever read a prospectus or a research report, past performance is no guarantee of future results. Turns out that's true.
And also, what is survivorship bias, and how does your research account for this in compiling?
Survivor bias, very important in SPIVA as well as in persistence, maybe even more important in SPIVA. Survivor bias refers to the following. If I look at funds which have a 10-year record and say, how did all the funds that I have a 10-year record for do over those 10 years? It's a biased sample. I'm not looking at all the funds that existed 10 years ago. I'm looking at the funds that existed 10 years ago and were good enough to survive. And what you typically find, we report on this in the Persistence Scorecard, is that the poor performers tend not to survive. And so what we do in persistence, for example, is to say in the example I gave you where we had 10 years of data, everybody who had a record for the first 5 years will look at how they did in the second 5 years. Some of them didn't survive. And in fact, you typically find that the worse someone's performance was in the earlier period, the likelihood of their survival goes down. That's the one thing that is fairly persistent in the persistence scorecard is the attrition among the bottom quartile or bottom half.
And you also scrub for style drift, correct?
We do. If a fund changes its style, obviously it may have characterized itself or been characterized, not our characterization. We're characterized as a growth fund and then changed to a value fund. You can't count as an outperforming growth fund if you change your style. So yes, we do. Part of what you see in looking at the persistence scorecard is the likelihood that a particular fund category experienced style drift.
Okay. And at IFA, we report consistently on both the SPIVA reports and the persistence scorecard. So we very much appreciate your research, Craig.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Murray.